getting into that headspace of, oh, is someone else going to approve of this painting? Is someone else going to validate the value of this drawing for me? Then I just get back into the, oh, I'm not good enough. Oh, I'm not going to succeed. Or feeling that I have to be what someone else wants me to be, and my art has to be what someone else wants me to be. It can really hurt when I feel like my art has to be validated by someone else, because it means that my very soul has to be validated by someone else's approval. So I'm learning how to only need my approval.
Hello, and welcome to The Art of Lost and Found, a podcast that explores the creative relationship between our inner and outer worlds. It's a creative exploration through stories, insights, resources, and tools to help you intentionally design your life and work. I'm your host, Brooke Eston, also known as the Creative Amplifier. I'm part strategist, part designer, part coach, and part artist. And I'm dedicated to helping fellow creatives bridge the gaps between those big dreams and practical realities. Now let's get into it. Today, I'm speaking with Carrie Alyson, an incredible professional visual artist and graphic designer. Carrie's an extra special guest for me personally. We met back in 2021 when we were both part of a program called Creative Alchemy, which was run by artist and author Amber Rae. Carrie's energy was so warm and supportive and generous and engaging, and she really stuck out to me among a 70-plus person group. We connected more one-to-one, and she eventually became a private coaching client of mine. We recorded this podcast back in 2021, so be sure to check out what Carrie is working on now, because she does reference a couple of projects she's already completed. From a very young age, Carrie learned to adjust who she was in order to fit in and feel accepted. She navigated the universal struggles of seeking external validation and feeling imposter syndrome whenever she didn't express her creativity according to other people's expectations. As her anxiety ran rampant and she continued to deny her authentic self, Carrie eventually burned out. But being the resilient woman that she is, Carrie refused to quit. She embedded herself deeper in creative communities and brought in the support that she needed. Throughout our coaching sessions together, she developed practical mantras and expectation-free experiments that helped her to let go of limiting beliefs that were holding her back. Join us on her empowering evolution from a woman just trying to fit in to an authentic and inspiring community leader, creating for others the accepting, exploratory, creative spaces that she so longed for herself. Hi, Carrie. Welcome to the Art of Lost and Found.
Thank you so much.
So I am so thrilled to have you on the Art of Lost and Found podcast, which is my creative baby that came out of the program that you and I both did together, Creative Alchemy, hosted by Amber Rae. I felt really drawn to you in the program in particular. You had this artistic presence about you that was very clear. Like I knew that you had developed your creative practice that felt very present, but the way that you showed up in navigating all of the different obstacles and challenges and shape shifting that happens in the creative process and how much support you gave to other people, both in terms of like practical support and then just empathetic general space holding support, just endeared you to me. As we neared more towards the end of that program, I felt really called to just start reaching out to people and trying to facilitate even more intimate connections with the hope of maybe even getting some friends, making some new friends in the creative space. And when you and I hopped on a call and you shared a lot more about your story, I knew immediately that I wanted to invite you onto this podcast. So thanks for saying yes.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for asking me.
Can you share a little bit about just who you are and what you're doing in the world right now?
Yes, I'm Carrie Alyson, and my website is aspenhearted.com. And I am a fine artist. I am a professional graphic designer. I've been an artist my entire life, and my creativity has always just been such a huge part of my entire life. And right now, I'm working on a project I'm calling Reconnecting with Our Wildness. And it's a combination of my love of wolves and wolf conservation and a desire to connect with other artists who might be struggling with the same imposter syndromes and perfectionism and just fear of putting yourself out there and really being yourself. And I'm imagining like this wolf pack of artists who are coming together and supporting each other and protecting each other and just working together to meet our creative goals.
Yeah, one of the things that I've definitely learned over the last couple of years is the importance of having a creative community. That was not on my radar before.
I've always had a creative community. So all the quarantines and lockdowns with COVID really, really changed everything in that space because I used to lead guided hikes and we'd go out and do nature journaling while we were hiking. And I loved introducing artists to that and just the whole range of people I would get to meet. Or I would go on art retreats. I went to Zion National Park a couple of years ago. I went to Yellowstone National Park a couple of years ago. And I just love these experiences of coming together as an art community. There is a wolf conservation and wolf dog rescue in the Los Angeles National Forest called Wolf Connection. And I want to host an art retreat with them. So I've connected with another artist to work on that. I'm talking to the organization about how we can set that up. And and one thing I really wanted to do, okay, I'm going to bring up some politics here. So every art retreat I've been on has been so very white. Everyone is white. So one thing I wanted to do with my art retreat is I want to be able to offer sponsorships or like a full scholarship to some BIPOC artists who might not have the opportunity to do that kind of thing because of their financial limitations, or even just because they're not already welcomed into the communities where these experiences are advertised. Art retreats are so important, not just for creative community, but also just for professional networking. So if someone's shut out of that experience, it's shutting them out of their career potentials. So I want to do what I can to make sure that people are being welcomed into the art community because it doesn't need to all be white.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for bringing that up. I think it's such an important issue that doesn't get spoken about enough. Yeah. And especially I think when it comes to the arts and creativity, and especially the way that you're presenting it in a way that is wild and raw and in nature and really brings us down to our deepest understanding of how much a part of an ecosystem we are. And ecosystems only thrive when there's diversity. That's the only way that they can exist. It's the only way that they can support and sustain the health and well-being of everything involved in that. So I think it's so important. And my hope is that in the coming years, as this issue is getting more and more attention and more people are speaking to this and making commitments to change how white so many things are, not just the arts, but like it's a massive global problem. And I'm so thrilled that you brought that up and that this is something that is weaving through the work that you're doing moving forward. It's essential. Before we go too far into the future, I would love for us to start back in the past. I believe that When we're born, we have that spark and that seed inside us. Some people call it a life force. Some people call it a soul. Some people call it dharma, whatever it is. There is something inside us that there is always a through line throughout our whole lives. So part of the reason actually that I was drawn to you and your work was because you started speaking about the wolf concept early on in Creative Alchemy. And I have a very special relationship to the book. Pinkola Estes' book, The Women Who Run with the Wolves, was a book that my mother used to read to me as bedtime stories when I was a little girl. Obviously, as a little girl, I didn't understand much of the symbolism in those stories, but I have such vivid memories and such a strong relationship with the concept of wilding and rewilding through the story of the wolf. So I would love to better understand. I don't know if this comes into the earlier stages of your journey of how the wolf made its way into your work in such a prominent way, or maybe it's just a natural environment and there's many manifestations of that. But can you tell us a little bit about when you were a very young child, before everybody's opinions started assimilating into your inner world to the point where you couldn't tell the difference? How did your creativity first express itself? And were you in a place where that was really supported and encouraged? Or was it something that ended up becoming stifled early on?
So I started being creative very, very young. I started drawing and painting when I was 3 years old because I was very fortunate. My parents were very supportive of my desire to be an artist and my desire to create. So even though we didn't have a lot of money, but they always seemed to prioritize making sure I had art supplies. I started drawing when I was 3 because I was obsessed with Disney's Dumbo and I loved elephants. I mean, I loved every animal, but I loved elephants especially. And I couldn't have a pet elephant, but I could draw elephants. I could draw as many elephants as I wanted and I could be surrounded by them. So my earliest introduction with creativity was very much the creation part of it, because I had this power to create something out of nothing and just manifest any reality I wanted through creativity. And I've managed to hold on to a little bit of that throughout my entire life. I think that's the creative spark I've never lost. And art has always been a means of connection, not just to the things I couldn't have or the things I was aspiring to be around, like a pet elephant, but just a connection to other people. We moved around a lot when I was a child, so I was always the new kid at school, but I would always make friends very quickly when they saw my art, and I would share art with people. And that would just be like the easiest way to make, and not even a superficial connection, but kind of a deep connection would come through sharing art with other people.
What do you think that was about? Like, why do you think art was something that was such a powerful connection?
I think because every human has that creative spark and desire in them. Like if I show my art to someone who's not an artist, I would so often hear, "Oh, I wish I could do that. I wish I could draw. I wish I could paint." And nowadays when people say that to me, I'm like, you can, it's just practice. It's just physical practice. But I've been lucky enough to have the time and space to devote to that kind of practice throughout my entire life. And I realized that is such an incredible privilege.
Why do you think your family made your ability to access art such a high priority?
Because they didn't have the access to it. They didn't have the privilege that I did. But my parents are both very creative. They're both hippies, and they got married young. They started having kids young, and then they got into this life of just having to have a 9-to-5 job. But they would always have these creative hobbies. My dad loves to draw and paint, and he does incredible woodworking. My mom sews and sculpts polymer clay dolls, and they're both just so creative, but they never had the opportunity to have the creative career they wanted. My dad ended up in drafting and engineering. It's a job with a lot of what looks like creative output, but it's so restrictive. And there's so many rules that you have to follow, and you don't get to actually use your own creativity. So I grew up in Tennessee. And when I finished college, I moved to San Francisco to be a graphic designer. And my dad told me that that was his dream in life. He had never told me about this before. He said it was my dream to move to San Francisco and be a graphic designer. And that's why we always supported you.
Oh, wow. That's kind of magical that you had no idea, but you immediately fell into that path as well. How cool.
I mean, I think I kind of a little bit knew because we had a lot of like graphic design and typography books in the house, and we had a lot of art books. So I did have very early exposure to that type of commercial art, and I fell in love with it very early. But I didn't know that that was his precise dream. And he told me that his father talked him out of it.
Why?
He didn't get that. He didn't explain that part. But his dad, I guess just for the typical societal reasons, you have to get a real job. You can't be an artist. San Francisco was a wild place even back then.
That was the peak potentially of the wild days of our parents' generations. Yeah. So can you share a little bit about how you got from being essentially kind of a fine artist, right? Like doing the drawings, doing the paintings, to then shifting into focusing on not only a digital medium, but a digital medium that is primarily focused on doing client work instead of your own creations. So can you share a little bit about how you shifted into that, or maybe how you sort of flowed into that?
So I've just always loved computers. I was one of those kids that loved computers. And as soon as I learned that you could draw on a computer, either by writing a coded program, because I'm that old, like the Wacom tablets and the pens came out and you could draw on the screen. Well, that was just groundbreaking. So definitely fell into digital media because it was fun. And a lot less difficult than doing cut and paste graphic design, which I'm also old enough that I have done. And it's awful. And I think getting into commercial art and not just graphic design, but also illustration, it still was that effort to create connections with people, because people would come to me and say, oh, I want you to draw this for me. Oh, I want you to create this for me. And some part of me felt like, oh, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is how people are going to like me and want to be friends with me, is if I'm using my creativity to create what they want to say. And I did get a lot of joy out of that. A lot of times these were projects that might resonate with something I'm interested in or something I feel deeply about. But at the same time, it was never me. It was what they had to say reinterpreted by me. And I think where a lot of the imposter syndrome and the perfectionism comes in is this feeling that, oh, if I'm not creating the right art for everyone, I'm just going to be cast out. I'm going to be shunned. No one's going to talk to me. So it took this really beautiful thing that was in my heart and just kind of made it a little bit toxic, because it was like, oh, I have to be creative according to someone else's rules. And I was losing that innate creativity that came from me in childhood, that said, where I was expressing what I felt and other people were responding to it. So one of the things I'm coming back to, I've restarted a fine art practice. And when I restarted it, it was still very much commercial. It was, what does someone else want to see? What is trending right now? What are the styles that people are doing? It wasn't consciously from a place of wanting to fit in. A lot of it was seeing other people's art and going, oh, I love that. I want to do that kind of style. Or seeing these art communities that were working on certain topics and themes. And I'd be like, oh, I love that. I want to be part of this community. But somehow like putting myself into these spaces never worked as well as just being myself. I think part of this comes from the fact that we moved around a lot when I was a kid. I was born in California, lived in Santa Fe, New Mexico, lived in New Jersey, lived in Nashville, Tennessee, in the Bible Belt. And so I'm going to all of these different places and having to remake myself and discovering these new communities that I suddenly need to fit into to feel accepted. And since my way of connecting was through art, I feel like I was changing my art expression to fit into these spaces. And then as I got older, it got to changing myself. Like I remember when I started wearing makeup because I needed to make sure I was perceived as feminine and a girl because I was supposed to, have a boyfriend and I was supposed to get married and have kids. That didn't happen. I proposed to my girlfriend yesterday.
Whoa, congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm assuming she said yes. Okay.
She said yes.
Wow, how exciting.
Yes.
Congratulations.
And both of our parents all of our parents are excited too. So
oh, great.
They also support us there.
Good. So important. It makes such a difference.
Yes. Yes. But like that's been part of really, understanding who I really am and the kind of partner and relationship I was really looking for, which was not what everyone else told me I needed to look for. So in coming to understand who I am, it brings my art back to expressing me.
Yeah. Was there a point in your journey where you had that realization that your art had shifted and then shifted you in the process? Or was it more of kind of a slower coming to terms with something that happened over a long period of time? Like a big crash or like a slow erosion?
I don't know that there's ever been a big crash. I think there's been a lot of smaller crashes that felt huge to me. Either where a relationship broke off once I started being myself again, instead of trying to be the person I thought that they wanted me to be, or even with friend groups where I stopped being who I was expected to be. And I started just being me. And a lot of times I would feel like I was getting abandoned or even pushed out at those points. And that I have anxiety. I'm pretty sure I have ADHD. And for a long time in my late 30s, I would have really intensely awful reactions to not feeling accepted by my friends, to feeling any kind of rejection, whether it was real or not. A lot of times it was just perceived. And it could be something as simple as, oh, my friends were having a picnic outside of their apartment in the front lawn and didn't invite me. Like, because of course it's a spur of the moment thing. They knew I was doing something else. They didn't invite anyone else. It was just the household. But I would feel this intense rejection of like, why wasn't I included? And I spent a long time exploring that and intentionally being alone and examining, why do I feel so rejected if someone's not spending 100% of their time with me? Because like I don't spend 100% of my time with anyone else. So it was very disproportionate to reality.
And how did you use your art or your creative practice to help you navigate that?
Part of it has been doing art that's just for me, that isn't shared with anyone. Doing art that's just for me and sharing it with the world and not caring what anyone thinks about it. And also just a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy, Prozac, getting the help that I needed to get my mental health back in a place where I can start thinking about things from a more realistic perspective and not this wild manic anxiety perspective.
Yeah, I think that there's something really powerful in what you said about how the outside influences were entering into your space and not even being conscious of the fact that your art was starting to shift. And I relate to that so much. And I got to a point where I even stopped sharing a lot of my art publicly. And I started moving into making art that I would destroy at the end when I was done with it. Like I went a whole other extreme, but it was about shifting my perspective. And I'm curious if you can relate to this also, but shifting the perspective of what the outcome is to then coming back to the process. I've learned that this is one of the key differences between like traditional arts, fine arts, and art therapy, is that traditional arts focus on the outcome, and the process isn't really particularly relevant unless it is attached to a desired outcome, versus art therapy, where the end result is pretty irrelevant. I mean, it's so irrelevant that you could potentially even destroy it and that not have any impact on the benefit that creating it gave you. So I'm curious, in your experience of moving from that place where you realized that your art had shifted to be more validation and approval seeking and fitting in, to then your process of learning to reclaim that and to get to a point where, one, you could make art that was just for you, and two, even potentially even harder, that you could share your art and say, I don't care what the response is, and really believe that. So can you share a little bit about how you made that transformation?
Yeah. So that transformation from doing artwork for the outcome to doing artwork for the process has really only been happening in the past couple of years. I had stopped doing art entirely for about 2 years. I was just so burned out. And then I think it was about 6 years ago, I started doing fine art again. No illustration. I wasn't taking any commissioned work. I was still doing my day job as a graphic designer, which was fine because I can compartmentalize that. But all of my fine art I was trying to do for me. And I still noticed every time I was creating something, my thought was, oh, who's going to buy this? How much can I sell this for? Oh, what if someone sees this error and now they're not going to buy a print of it? How can I fix this? And it all just came back to, how can my art be some kind of commercial product? How can it just be a commodity? And I still struggle with it. I have to consciously, when I'm working on my art, if I feel my thoughts going into how much can I sell this for? I have to stop myself and I have to come back to my creative space and go, it doesn't matter. I don't need this particular piece of art to make money. This particular piece of art is not going to guarantee my financial stability. It's not going to guarantee that anyone's going to like me or love me. It's just a piece of art. I am a little bit thrifty, so I hate destroying art. But what I did instead is most of my paintings lately have been watercolor on Yupo, which is a recycled polypropylene surface. So it's plastic. And you can just run it underwater and completely erase the entire thing and it's gone. And you have a fresh new sheet of paper to use. So this art is very fragile. It is very easily completely obliterated from existence. And I kind of like that. I like that fragile quality of it, that it's easy to destroy if I need to.
Have you accidentally destroyed any?
Oh, yeah.
And how did you feel when that happened?
Well, this is not a new experience of accidentally destroying art because I am clumsy. I knock over my paints. I knock over brushes. One thing I always do is I set my brush down and then it rolls on top of my painting and then it's messed up, or I'll put my elbow in it. But I'm getting more okay with that happening. And I did a practice with an artist friend where we were doing art that we were intentionally messing it up by smudging it or dropping something on it. And then just dealing with it, either leaving the mistake there or working with the mistake instead of trying to fix it, or instead of thinking we had to go back and start over. And that's a really fantastic practice to come back to whenever I'm getting into a perfectionist mode. And I've also discovered that a lot of times if I feel like something looks wrong in a painting, if I just set it aside for a couple of days and come back to it, I can't find the mistake anymore.
I think this is part of the value of practice. It's not just in building your skill, but it's in really kind of building stamina for the whole artistic process or the whole creative process.
Oh yeah. A lot of art is rote muscle movement. And you do have to have physical stamina to do it, because when I stopped drawing and painting for 2 years and came back to it, oh, my hand hurt so much. And my forearm was killing me all the time. And I get tendonitis if I'm gripping too tight. So yeah, there's a lot of physical stamina and effort that comes into it, but also a lot of mental practice and a lot of emotional practice in making art. Because getting into that headspace of, oh, is someone else going to approve of this painting? Is someone else going to validate the value of this drawing for me? Then I just get back into the, oh, I'm not good enough. Oh, I'm not going to succeed. Or feeling that I have to be what someone else wants me to be, and my art has to be what someone else wants me to be. And I think that since I so deeply identify as an artist and have identified as an artist literally my entire life, it can really hurt when I feel like my art has to be validated by someone else, because it means that my very soul has to be validated by someone else's approval. So I'm learning how to only need my approval.
And how do you do that? How do you catch yourself when you're going into that cycle and you can feel the old limiting beliefs, the anxiety, the imposter syndrome, the fear, all of this stuff rising up in you? How do you then be like, oh, I see you. I got you by the tail. We're actually going to go this way instead of that way. How do you do that?
It's very much a continuous practice. I write myself reminder notes. I have a little note up that says, what if my instincts are actually really fucking good? And I have it right where I can always see it. And I have to have visual reminders. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll set a timer. Like I will let myself paint I'll set a timer for like 15 minutes, because I've found that is kind of the duration of my mental cycle from, oh, this is great, I'm the greatest artist ever, to, oh my God, I'm the worst artist ever. So if I catch myself and stop, because the timer goes off, and I regroup and go, okay, starting to spiral again, come back to reality, come back to now, I'm just painting. This painting is not going to determine the course of my entire life. It is just a painting.
I think that there's something really profound when you think about being creative or being artistic as a verb, right? I am creating or I am painting, versus when you think about it as a noun. I am a creative. I am an artist. Can you share a little bit about how you kind of oscillate between all of that?
That's interesting. Okay, so I think as a creative, it is always for me. My brain is very active. It's mildly manic. I take drugs to control that. But yeah, I'm always generating ideas and thinking of things, and I'm constantly visualizing things. So if you're familiar with doing like a guided visualization, which is kind of like daydreaming, I constantly am doing that. I just have an overlay of something else over reality. And it's not like a hallucination because I know it's not there, but it's there all the time. And then creating, I sadly have to find myself limiting my physical creating time more and more as I get older, as my tendonitis gets worse, as my ability to just sit in a chair for hours decreases because it hurts my back. So I've had to learn new ways of getting all this creative energy out in a way that isn't taxing my physical body. And it really gets as far as I will get intense migraines and just have to sleep all day because I'm using up all of my physical energy trying to keep up with my creative energy. And then my body just like goes, no, you just have to stay in bed for the next 24 hours and you can't do anything. And it's not fun.
Yeah, the body really does keep the score, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of that relationship between the creative energy that lives inside us and the body in which that is inhabiting, I noticed a theme coming up in our conversations, and then also on your website, the way you talk about how your art previously was externally focused and now is much more about exploring the internal landscape. And then also in terms of your relationship with nature, because that seems really important and really a potent force in your life. So can you share a little bit about how you merge together what is happening in your external world and what needs to be expressed or heard from your internal world? And then where does that live? Does that live in any of your commercial work? Does that live just in your private collection? Or do you allow it to flow into either space depending on maybe a set of criteria or different variables?
I've always loved being outdoors. As a family, we would go out hiking all the time when I was really young. My parents loved the outdoors. They definitely instilled in us an appreciation for protecting the environment and respecting nature and just a love of the whole natural world. So that's just something that was hammered into me from a young age. And it's something that I accept as, yes, this is true and good. And this is part of me. And we are part of the natural world in every single sense of the way. We've just separated ourselves from it. So a lot of my art practices involved opportunities to go outside, art retreats at national parks or going on hikes and drawing in nature journals while we were hiking, or even just plein air painting where I'm just standing outside and painting what I see. So being in nature is something that I think nurtures my creativity and keeps it going. And I definitely draw on it. I think it has always been a theme in my artwork because I love to draw animals and I love to draw plants, and green is one of my favorite colors. And I love all the natural tones that you can take from the world and turn into paint. Like I have so many watercolor paints that are made from literally ground up rocks. And I have like a whole collection of pigments that I purchased from all these different places, and I can mix them up into watercolors and literally capture nature on paper. And that's just amazing to me. But like the world has given us everything we need for creativity. It's given us color. It's given us shape. It's given us the actual pigment that we can use. And I have been lucky that, so my graphic design day job, I work for a Girl Scout council. And Girl Scouts are very much about outdoors and nature, and also about supporting communities that have been under-resourced and disadvantaged. So I do feel very fulfilled by my day job, but it's not as creative as I would like.
Yeah, it's tricky when you are looking for creative fulfillment in a day job. You know, there's very few people, at least that I've encountered, where they've been able to find that perfect match. That being said, almost every professional creative that I've spoken to has touched that. They've had certain client projects or certain things that, like you were saying earlier, relate to something that you're passionate about. But at the end of the day, you're kind of in the passenger seat rather than in the driver's seat around that. So you mentioned earlier about how you're able to compartmentalize. So the day job feels somewhat separate from your more lifelong artistic practice. Have you always been that way, or did you have to learn to cultivate that separation?
I think I've always had it in a certain way. And I love doing a page layout as much as I love doing a painting. And it kind of takes a different side of my creativity. Graphic design is a lot of creative problem solving, which I love. It's like solving a puzzle. Whereas painting, I can't think of a painting as a puzzle because then it becomes work. And I'm not even quite sure what I would call my fine art creativity. Anything other than just like a flow, just letting the stream of conscious of what I'm feeling. Or sometimes it's even just as simple as, what color do I want to paint with today? And that's all that matters, is I'll just take one color. And if a painting of a flower comes out of it, or if a painting of a wolf comes out of it, it doesn't matter, because the expression was just, this is the color that I'm feeling like right now.
Yeah. So speaking of wolves, now you're in what appears to be, at least from what you've shared publicly and I've been able to see, a really intense time of focusing on wolves. And you mentioned this creative community that you're part of, and this retreat that you want to build and design with the Wolf Connection. So can you walk us through how you got to a place where you had this, what sounds like a sacred relationship with this particular animal, and how that has woven its way into your life, not just your creative practice?
So wolves are just one of the animals I've been obsessed with since I was a child. And when I was younger, I would draw wolves all the time. I would wear t-shirts with wolves on them. I had a wolf necklace because we'd gone to a local zoo that had wolves, and just like getting to see wolves in person was so incredible. And I think I stood by the wolf enclosure for like 10 minutes trying to make a telepathic connection with them.
Wow.
Didn't work, but I'm not giving up yet. But then As I got older, there was this perception of like, oh, wolves are a masculine thing. Wolves aren't cool. Wolves aren't what girls are into. And I kind of abandoned it as, okay, well, I can't be into wolves if I want to be accepted, if I want to fit in. So coming back to wolves is kind of reclaiming my true nature. And like, I am this girl who loves wolves, and I don't care if it's not cool. I don't care if you don't like it. I do. But what I found is everybody thinks it's cool.
Yeah. The coolest. I literally have like a cutout, like a wooden laser cutout of a wolf's head right above my altar. Like just randomly. I don't know if I have a spiritual or something connection to it, but I think going back to what I shared about my childhood and Women Who Run with the Wolves being so influential, and then subconsciously me also wanting to rewild, there is something in the wolf that does feel like universally attractive.
Yeah. As an adult, what I admire in wolves is the sense of bravery and courage and family. Like, they protect their families very intensely. They have this connection that is so intense, and it's essential to their livelihood, to being able to survive. They have to have these communities. And I think humans do too. But one thing I've really been learning from this whole art project and coming back to painting wolves is that art is always going to be the thing that brings me back to my true self. I can't fake my artistic and creative self forever. I always come back to what is me.
Can you articulate, what does it feel like when you're away from yourself? And what does it feel like to return?
I think when I'm away from myself, it's difficult. When I'm pretending to be someone else so that I can fit in, It's exhausting. And it creates a lot of anxiety because I'm always second guessing what I'm saying, what I'm doing. Every single action I make, I feel like I'm being watched and judged. And it's very crushing and exhausting. And when I'm being myself, the people who I can be myself around, it's just easy. It's light and easy and free. And I also feel like it allows me to express more love. It allows me to give more love and trust to people because they've already seen who I am. I'm not hiding anything from them. So I've trusted them with my safety from the get-go. And if they've shown that they're safe to be around, then yeah, it's so much just more freeing and open and loving.
Yeah, it's almost like a wolf or a dog or, so many other animals in the animal kingdom that at first, when there's that first encounter, there's the figuring out of like, who are you? Are you safe? Should I be threatened? What's going on? And then once that moment, it can be just a moment of, okay, they're not threatening to me, then it's wag the tail, come close. I mean, I don't know about a wolf, but in terms of lots of other animals, it is there's a switch point that happens around, are you safe or are you a threat?
Yes, absolutely. I think wolves do that too, where they'll test each other out. Like, is it okay? But they also communicate a lot. I was recently watching a documentary where they had a chance to observe some wolves that had never had human contact before. So they weren't afraid of humans. And they really got to observe like the family dynamics between the wolves. And it was fascinating how much and how articulate the wolves are, like when they communicate with each other. There's a lot of language between them. And I've always had a hard time communicating with humans. I've always felt socially awkward. I've always felt like I say the wrong things, I do the wrong things. And where I tend to fall out with people is when we're not communicating that we're on different wavelengths, or that like I'm saying something that's offensive to them and they're not saying, hey, this is hurting me, or they're saying something that offends me and I don't feel safe to say, hey, this hurts me. So not having communication and not having boundaries creates barriers.
Do you find that you are able to use your art as a form of communication with other people?
Absolutely. I definitely think, and I think that comes from childhood and just always being the artsy kid in class, because I would just always draw things all the time. And it would make people interested in learning more about me, in just kind of hanging out with me. And it would draw in this community of people who are like, and maybe it came a little bit from the fact that art is a vulnerability. It's a way of putting yourself out there, as much as going up to someone and saying, hi, nice to meet you, I'm so-and-so. Saying like, here's something I drew is giving away some inner part of me. And I think people get that just on a natural level because we all understand it. So yeah, it's definitely, it's the way that I communicate best is through art. And I often find that my art communicates more than I could ever say or write.
Yeah, I mean, I can say that from my own experience with seeing your art. I shared at the beginning that I felt drawn to you initially just from your energy and how interactive you were with other people. But then when I saw your work, I was like, holy shit. Whoa. Hey, that was my true inner dialogue reaction of, wow, there's something here that made me want to know more. I wanted to go deeper. And I didn't feel that in the same way when it was just the interaction on the platform. It was like a different language, like a soul language. When I saw the art, I just went, whoa, there's so much more in here. I need to reach out to this woman. I need to see if she's open for connection. And luckily you were. We've been able to Zoom a couple of times now. And I hope plenty more in the future. But Yeah, there is something powerful there about it being another language that transcends space, time, cultural language, like all of these different barriers that we have. When you see an image and you get a feeling from that, and especially I'm not familiar with your whole body of work, but the work that you're doing now is so mesmerizing because there's so many layers to it. You have the controlled shape of, yes, this is a wolf, it looks like a wolf, but then the way that you're using the medium is so, it feels like free and organic, and it's a dance between control and just allowing.
Yes, yes. That's something that is wonderfully unavoidable in the medium that I'm using, of watercolor on plastic. You cannot control it. All I can do is put the pigment down and gently guide it in the direction I want it to go, but it's going to do what it wants. And I have to let it. And that has also been a big part of my process of getting away from the outcome, because I have no control over the outcome. But for the most part, every single painting that has come out has had some beautiful result. Even if it's something that I end up destroying because I decide this is not a painting that needs to live forever, it still has something magical and beautiful in it that the paint taught me, that the paint showed to me. And one of the things that really makes it special to me is I can't ever recreate it, because it was all random according to how gravity affected it, how the air was moving, what the humidity was in the air. And so that is just a moment that can never be recreated, but it's captured there. And it was something that came both from me and from nature, and just from the passage of time and the universe. And it's like, I get chills thinking about it.
Me too. Me too. Yeah. And there's something also really interesting that I'm reflecting on in relation to your relationship perhaps between your anxiety and your art, because the way that anxiety at least shows up for me is when my fear of the uncontrollable, unknown future gets too big, right? And it feels scary. The unknown feels scary in anxiety. But you just talked about the unknown in your art being this beautiful, magical, essential ingredient in being able to capture that. So do you ever think about the uncontrollable or the unknown in these two areas of your life and how they dance with each other?
All the time, all the time. One of my art mantras that I've picked up in the past year is, let's see what happens. So anytime I feel like, oh no, I've just messed this up, I did something wrong, I'll stop myself and go, no, let's see what happens. And whatever happens, I'll deal with it. And if it means I throw away the painting, I throw away the painting. If it means that something incredible has happened and I have a masterpiece, then great, that's what happened. But it's been a part of letting go of what the outcome is, and just accepting that what is going to happen is going to happen. I can't control it. I can only control my reaction to what happens.
In those moments when you lack control and you realize it, you either have the option to freak the fuck out or to be like, okay, let's see what happens. This could be cool. This could be better. This could be an opportunity that, hey, there could be a surprise masterpiece. Let's roll with that and see how it goes. And I think that's a really important theme of my life, and a theme, like part of my core values is around evolution and transformation and redemption over perfection, right? Perfection's boring, kind of lame. Like, even if you could hit that moving target, even if you could, it's like you look at something perfect, and you're like, okay, and it's okay, on to the next, versus looking at something that, may be perceived as having flaws or imperfections, but it's so much more interesting and intriguing and attractive.
Yes. Also, what what even defines perfection? It's a moving target, and everyone has a different definition of it. And it's going to constantly be changing. So it's an impossible thing to achieve. And I think it might have been Bob Ross who said that your painting's never going to be perfect. You're never going to be the best artist. And that's good, because if you were, you'd have to stop being an artist, because then you're done. And I don't ever want to be done being an artist.
So with that in mind, now that you've gone through, or at least maybe now that you have more awareness of having gone through this creative evolution and transformation, to shifting the relationship you have with the art, shifting the environment in which you're able to do your art, how do you, in the current context of your life, how do you support your creative practices in a way that continues to bring you joy, to support mental health, to give you a place for freedom and expression and exploration? How do you, what structures or scaffolding do you put up in your life to support you in being able to live a creative lifestyle?
A lot of it has been centering my art around the idea of play, that it needs to be fun. So I try to be and since I do have an art business where I'm trying to sell my own work, I do have to do some work a lot of the time. But I also pay attention to where my energy is. And like, if my brain's just going, I don't want to do this, I don't want to upload stuff to the website, I don't want to work on invoices, I don't. Because I already have a full-time job that supports me, and I don't need to force myself to make money off of paintings yet. So I give myself time and space to just do it for fun. And I just give myself time and space to play. And one of the things I've been doing lately is trying to find connection through the art that I want to make directly with other people, in like saying, I want to paint more wolves. What color should I use? And someone gives me a color and I'll go, okay, well, I never thought of that. That might be weird. And then I do it and it's incredible. It's so cool. Like, it's just amazing. So just still having fun with it, that I don't have pressure to make money off of this. There's really no expectation of the outcome except that it's going to be a specific color. And it's very freeing. But it still lets me, art has to be a community practice for me, I think, because holing up in my studio and being away from everyone and making art is fun, but I'm an extrovert and I need other people's energy to keep going. So making those connections with my art is what keeps me going.
I was so moved by what you've recently been sharing on Instagram with the making of the cards, like a oracle deck or tarot cards or something in that realm, and your request just out into the larger Instagram community of send me a song and I'm going to just listen to it and I'm going to paint it was so thrilling. Like, I just intuitively sent you a song. And then when I saw that you painted something, I felt the music in the piece of work. And I felt like almost that I was able to vicariously live through your synesthesia like experience of translating music into a physical art form.
It's a little awkward for me because sometimes when I'm doing these paintings for other people, it doesn't really mean anything to me. Like, the song doesn't resonate with me. I really am just painting what I see. Also getting these messages of like, and I'll write down notes about like the thoughts that come up. And a lot of times these thoughts mean nothing to me, but then they mean so much to the recipient. And I'm just like, okay, this is spooky. I love this.
Yeah. It's like you're
I don't know
channeling.
if I believe it. Yeah. It seems a little too magical. And sometimes I have a hard time believing in magic, but then it comes back to just being like, okay, this is real.
Yeah. Yeah. I heard somebody say, it might have even been Brene Brown, but she said something like, I don't trust a mystic who doesn't believe in science, but I also don't trust a scientist who doesn't believe in mysticism. Like there is some interplay and some dance that's happening, whether or not we can understand what is happening is irrelevant. There is something there, and I feel like we all intuitively know it. Well, I guess in closing here, because I guess we have to end the podcast eventually. I would love to know if you have any words of wisdom that you would like to potentially share with your younger self or somebody else that might be not as far along in their creative journey.
I think I'm going to have to go back to what I wrote down earlier and go back to no matter how far I stray from my true self, art is what brings me back. Your creativity is from your soul. And if you're denying who you are, you're denying what your creativity wants to be and what it wants to express. So it requires vulnerability. It requires acceptance of who you are and embracing who you are. And it's tough. It's tough, but when you do it, it'll be scary, but it just seems to always end up so beautiful.
Yeah, that's the soul path, right?
Yes.
Scary yet beautiful.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. And for everybody who wants to follow your journey and follow your work, where is the best place for people to connect with you?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
Yeah.
I'd love to do it again sometime.
Yes, please.
And you can find me at aspenhearted.com. And that's where I keep my art, and it links to my Instagram. And I think I'm the only one using Aspen Hearted out there. So you can generally find me that way.
Yeah. And it's very visual. If you start searching for anything Aspen related that comes up on Instagram, I'm sure your eye will immediately be drawn to Carrie's work.
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Art of Lost and Found podcast. I hope that you are feeling inspired and empowered to go forth and explore your curiosity and creativity. As always, if you want any more information about any of our guests or the show notes or anything we discussed on today's episode, you can head over to www.brookeston.com/podcast. Thank you so much, and looking forward to seeing you in the next episode.